Hey everyone, it's me out there, Noah Barfield here, and I know the background is different again. Actually, I have family visiting, so the room situation had to be rearranged just a little bit. But I know you're not here to listen to me talk about that. You are here to listen to me talk about writing stuff. And in the scope of writing stuff, last week I started talking about multiple different points of view, and it was fantastic. So this week I've decided to continue with that. Meaning this Writer's Corner video is going to be about how you decide the different points of view you want to use and how many of them should you be using anyway. And I know, you're probably thinking, Noah, this is an easy thing that I do in the very beginning of my writing process and I continue with throughout my entire story. I don't really see the need for video on this topic. Well, lucky you! That's great and fantastic. However, if you're like the rest of us mortals, it's not so easy. Maybe you start out writing it in a different point of view than you end with. Maybe your story started out in third-person limited point of view in the past tense, and by the end it's in first-person point of view with 3 separate characters in the present tense, and it changed 17,000 different times between then, so much so you don't even recognize the novel that you've been working on for the past years, and you just want to scrap it and burn it with so much fire. I am here to help prevent that from happening, or at least make it a lot easier to fix. So in this video, whenever I'm talking about points of view, I'll be talking about 2 different things. I'll be talking about the style in which you are relating the story to the reader, meaning first person, second person, third person limited, or third person omniscient points of view. Now, for the purpose of this video, I'm not going to be really covering second person point of view so much, because I don't really know how to do multiple different points of view from the second person perspective without being really confusing. If any of you know how to do that, let me know, but I'm going to kind of be skipping that in this video. Now secondly, I will be talking about how many different characters' eyes you need to be viewing the world from. Whether you need to be seeing the world from 2 different characters' eyes, 3, 8, 11, 1,000, it all depends on what you feel is needed for your story. But before you just dive right into it, there may be some things to consider before you start writing. First, you have to consider intimacy. Is intimacy something that you feel that you need for your characters? Do you need your readers to really relate to these characters, to root for them and cheer for them? Do you need to be inside of their heads, as horrible as that can be or as amazing as it can feel? Is that something that you need to further the... Or can you get away with making sure that your readers laugh at their joys and cry with their pains, but we don't really need to know where they stand on everything? Or are your characters simply going to be minuscule plot devices to further your story and don't really matter in the grand scheme of things? Whenever you're talking about intimacy, you have to remember, the more characters you use in your story that are the focal point of it, the less intimacy you develop for each one. And this is especially true depending on the perspective you use. I'm going to kind of remove third-person omniscient point of view for the purpose of this specific conversation right now, because you don't really get related to characters in the third-person omniscient point of view. You have a harsh, all-knowing narrator who doesn't really care about the limitations of humanity and what you're writing about, so you don't really get attached to the characters. They're simply mouthpieces for you. But third-person limited and first-person, you do get attached to the characters if it's done well. But the more characters you use, the less you relate to each one. If you have a detective story written from the first-person point of view and you have 12 different viewpoints of this one murder, and it's a 360-page novel, you only get 30 pages per character. I can't get related to someone within 30 pages. So I have a great rule of thumb that has worked for me countless times, and whenever I tell someone to use it, it tends to help spruce up their writing just a little bit. So whenever I'm considering how many different points of view I want to be using, how many characters I want my reader viewing the world from, I think, how many characters do I want to read about in one story? Do I want to read about 5 different viewpoints of the characters and getting 5 different angles on something? No, I will go up to a maximum of 4. Legendland, I used 3 different viewpoints, and that's because I had a bigger world that I wanted to explore and a couple different angles of one different conflict that I needed to cover. So it all depends on what you feel like you could stand, because you ultimately need to feel great about your story. Now another thing to consider is breadth. So some things to consider about breadth of the plot is how big does my plot need to be? Can it be trimmed down at all? Is it going to make sense to the reader to have this many characters? Does it need to be intimate? How are my characters going to relate to the story? How are my readers going to relate to the characters that relate to the plot? And how realistic is it going to feel? Is realistic something I need? How complex can I make it and get away with it without people marching angrily to my doorstep because they don't understand what I'm talking about? So those are some things to consider. Whenever you have a bigger plot, you commonly need more characters to cover it, which means less intimacy, which is fine if you have a wonderful writing style and an engaging plot and characters that you remember. Maybe you don't get attached to, but they're iconic enough that they stick in your brain. Now if you have a smaller plot with more intimacy involved, more personality, it's closer to home, then maybe first person is good for you. Third person limited is always great if you need something in between because you can kind of sway in one direction or the other depending on what's required. Lastly, you have to consider scope. Scope is how big the world is that this takes place in. Do you have a very detailed, in-depth world that you spend a lot of time making, where you've defined their ecology and their economy and the political system and the different parts of history and different sections of the world? I'm hoping that's not just me, but it could be. Now, no matter what, no matter how much time you spend on a world, if it's a bigger world, you always need more characters to encompass it, or you need to be very creative in how they see the world and the other characters that they interact with. If you want people to really get to know this world that you've created and spend a lot of time with that's a lot bigger than most other worlds are, third person omniscient is probably what you want. Now, if you want to get attached to the characters while also simultaneously having an iconic world that you want to visit, like Harry Potter and Hogwarts, then third person limited might be what you want to do. Now, if you have a smaller world, or at least a world that gets much more personal, then first person perspective might be for you, because Legendland is a big world, but I only explore bits and pieces of it over time. So those are some things to consider. Do you really need to get to know this world? How important is it that you do get to know it? Can you get away with not having so many characters that it focuses on and having kind of secondhand information come in? That's a great thing to do if you're writing from the first person point of view with multiple different characters. You don't need so many characters, you just need these characters to interact with other more minor characters that tell them bits and pieces about what's happening, or maybe through observations that slowly compile this world that you're getting to know. How big does the world need to be? Can it be shrunk down? How many characters do I need to encompass this? Is it going to be something that the readers focus on more than the plot? Are they going to focus on this more than the characters themselves? Do I want the world to be more interesting with the characters, or do I want a mix of both? Those are all things to consider. Now, before I go, one final thing. Some of you might be thinking, well, I know how many characters I want, but I haven't decided on the style point of view that I want to use. Maybe I can go with more than one. And to that I say it can be done. It can be done actually really well, but I would not go above 2. Because you don't really want to read a story that has first person point of view and then both third persons. You can probably get away with just using a first person perspective and then one third person perspective, or maybe 2 third persons. It really depends on what you feel you need. But sometimes it's really great to be able to zoom in and out of your story. But you have to consider, is this going to dissociate my reader? Are they going to get super jumbled up and not really know what is going on if I keep zooming in and out of my story? It's something to be used sparingly. But is this something that is really actually crucial to my storyline and my plot? Oh my god, how am I going to do this? So before you freak out, just think, how often do I need to zoom in and out of my story? And do that well while still making sure that the reader does not, well, forget where they are and what's happening, because that can be a big problem. So this has been how exactly you go about deciding, just some things to consider before you dive right into your story and you start writing the different points of view. Now here is the part where I blatantly brag about my book real quick. Legendland, this beauty you see right before you that looks like a movie poster, Legendland is so many places. You can buy it on Amazon. It's available as an ebook on there too, if any of you have e-readers that you want to read it on. You can also order the gorgeous physical copy. You can also buy it directly from our website. I'm not saying we package it with extra love if you buy it directly from us, but we do. You can also find me personally in a lot of places. I'm obviously on YouTube, so comment and subscribe to that. Or you can find me on Twitter or Facebook. I do my best to respond to all messages and tweets as soon as I possibly can, which is probably within a couple minutes. And I do my best to respond to all comments. Don't forget to subscribe. So thank you for watching, and I hope you continue to enjoy.